Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquatham. And listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai, and back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of wanted to go through this article that I came across. It's in regards to China. So I'm going to read it from BBC.com here. And it says, what new weapons on show at huge parade say about China's military strength? Right. So this came out about 7 hours ago. And it says the following. It says, China has unveiled a range of new weapons, drones, and other military hardware in a massive parade that many see as a clear message to the United States and its allies. The event saw Xi Jinping host more than 20 foreign aid heads of state, including Russia, Vladimir Putin, who is the president, and North Korea's Kim Jong-un, whom both rely on China for economic and support and more. It says it was a display of Xi's growing power, on the world stage of China's military prowess. The show concluded the Guam killer missile. It says the loyal wingmen, drone, and even robotic wolves. It says, beyond the hype and shiny new weaponry, what did we learn? Here are 5 takeaways. So it says here, number 1, how well can China deploy its weapons? So it says that what was clear from Wednesday's display that China has been able to quickly produce a wide, diverse range of weapons. 10 years ago, the military technology they put on showed tended to be rudimentary copies, of far more advanced equipment invented by the U.S., notes Michael Raska, assistant professor of military transformations program in Nanyang Technological University of Singapore. It says, I'm just kind of skimming through it, so I might just hit some of the key points here. It says China's top-down structure is significant resources enable it to churn out new weapons faster than many other countries. Points out Alexander Neal, an adjunct fellow of the Pacific Forum. So essentially, you have people in different key spots in whether they're situated in like universities, essentially giving their expertise in what's going on with China, right? They're giving their take, right? But remember, these people are not prophets, right? The scriptures say that the Lord will reveal his secrets unto his servants, the prophets, because what we're seeing here, is essentially a stirring up of these other nations, gearing up for a spirit of war. As a matter of fact, I didn't have this written down, but I guess I'll start off with this precept here. Just bear with me on this. Let me just open this up. This is Proverbs. This is Proverbs chapter 21, verse 1. And it says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord Yahweh, as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will, right? So this is the spirit that the Lord is placing upon these different kings. He's placing a more of a warlike spirit to essentially engage in war because, there is a huge controversy. There is a huge problem. You have a group of people masquerading as the people in that so-called Holy Land, right? And it's causing a strong rift. It's causing a backlash. It's causing problems. And that's how we're in the spirit of, the people who are in that land are not the real and true people. There is something going on here because we know, pursuant to the prophecies, when you read Isaiah the second chapter, when the real people are in that land, there would be no more wars anymore. But why is it? And ask yourself, like, okay, if that's the case, why are these nations gearing up for that spirit of war? Because that's the kind of time we're in. And that also shows that the people in the land are not the real and true people. So, as a matter of fact, let me read that also. And I'll go back to the article, right? So this is Isaiah 2, verse 1, and it says, "And the word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem, and it says, it shall come to pass in the last days, and the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it." And it says, "And many people shall go, and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, unto the house of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and he will walk in his paths. And out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." And that's not what's happening right now, right? We're in a more of a, these nations are actually in a more of a warlike spirit. But here's the point I wanted to hit. Verse 4, and it says, "He shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and shall beat their swords into plowshares." So their weapons are going to be more into agricultural tools. As a matter of fact, let me look up, just for edification, let me look up what a plowshare is. Plowshare. Okay, so it says a plowshare in agriculture is a component of a plow. It is used, it is the cutting and leading edge. One second. Preceding the moldboard and it closely follows the coulter on one or more ground-breaking spikes when plowing. The plowshare itself is often a hardened blade dressed into an integral moldboard by a blacksmith, so making a unified combination of plowshare, a moldboard, a whole being responsible for entering the cleft in the earth made by the coulter's first cutting through, turning the earth over. So essentially, it's a tool for used in agriculture, right? You could just go on Google, and it's so essentially it's following. So you would have an animal dragging it, and it's basically working behind as the animal walks along, basically, right? So essentially, this is a tool for agriculture, but we're seeing that these nations are not in that spirit of trying to develop and put resources, their economic finances, whatever it is, into making agriculture investments. Rather, they're making investments into military, into war, because that's the spirit, that's the time we're in, right? Finishing off verse 4, and it says, "Neither shall they learn war anymore." So when the real people are actually placed back in the land, right, back in Jerusalem, you would not have these nations worrying about anymore. But the contrast is happening. I want to get that, right? I kind of just wanted to read that to show there's a disconnect, because if these people were the real people, there would be peace on earth, right? They wouldn't have any more, these nations rising up against rising up against one another, and so on and so forth. The point, okay, so what I'll kind of just read through each, what's it called? Tab here. There's like 5 key points. So the second point, it says China is focusing on missiles to counter the U.S. It says China has rolled out plenty of missiles, including some variants. So it says the Dongfeng -61. It says the Dongfeng 5C intercontinental ballistic missile, which can be launched from northern China and hit the U.S., and the Guam Killer, right? That's very interesting because if I'm not mistaken, Guam, I believe, hold on. It says Guam is a part of the U.S. and incorporated U.S. territory, right? So it's not in the U.S., but it's a part of the U.S., right? So let me see just on a map where this is located. So it seems to be very close to the Philippines here, right, and Indonesia, right? But it's kind of like a territory and extension of the U.S. You know, just for edification, I kind of just wanted to get that. It says the Dongfeng 26D intermediate range missile, which can hit key U.S. military bases in Guam, right? So it says, hold on. So it says number three, China is going all the way with AI and drones. It says there were wide range of drones, some of them AI powered, right? So AI has essentially become so excuse me, technologically advanced to the point where you see that its technologies is being used in not economic but military warfare. It says, but the one that grabbed eyeballs was the AJX-002 giant submarine drone. So it is warfare underwater and it is warfare in the air too, right? So, um, so what I can do, I can also link this description, um, this video in the description, this article, I'm sorry, and it says number four. It says China may have the technology, but the U.S. still has the edge, right? So it says the parade clearly shows that China is catching up quickly with the U.S. in its military technology and has the resources to build up and huge arsenal of weapons, right? So it says the U.S. military, because there is a bottom-up culture where units on the ground can make the decisions of situation evolves and alter the fighting strategies, right? It says this makes them more agile in battle. I'll read verse 5. Not verse 5, I'm sorry. Section 5 here. It says the parade was a weapons sales pitch and a chance to show the U.S. a united front, with the leaders of more than 24 countries invited to the event. It says the parade of weapons and tanks was essentially a great sales pitch on Chinese arms, a potential buyers. It says Mr. Neal points out some of the countries in attendance, such as Myanmar, is already known for buying huge quantities of Chinese weapons, but the chance to sell to new customers on or increase orders is how Chinese government can extend its influence globally. Dr. Raska notes, right? So these are people giving their 2 cents of what's going on, but they don't know. They're kind of more in that spirit of, as the scriptures talk about, I shall not suffer the loss of children nor see widowhood. They're not really taking, these other nations seriously, right? So this is why these people are kind of more, I don't want to say they're specifically on a mirth spirit, but when you look at America on a whole, it's generally in a very over mirth, joyful, careless spirit, right? It's not thinking about the consequences of their actions and how much detriment America has done, not just to their own allies, but to all these other nations around the boat. And a lot of these nations are getting sick and tired of America, right? So let's go to Okay, so this is the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 9. So just to kind of solidify the point of the type of spirit these other nations are actually in, right? So it says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war, wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong, right? So you see the way these other nations are behaving, because America has always been known, ever since after World War II, to being known as more of the powerhouse when it comes to actual military strength, right? And during that time, when you think about China, China went through its periods of where it was predominantly into farming, and eventually, they essentially came up. You had people such as Mao Zedong that came up, and they kind of put China more on a recognizable map, right? The way that China has essentially shifted from a predominantly agricultural stage, an agrarian society, now going into a booming economic society where they can actually kind of flex their muscle on the world stage. And this is the spirit that these other nations are in right now. And that also, because the article, when you go back into it, it mentioned North Korea as well. That is the exact same spirit that North Korea is in, and is leveling, and are starting to level the playing field with these other nations. I'm sorry, with America, because America was kind of seen as kind of like the big guy on the playground, on the world stage as a whole. But now you're starting to see there are other key players trying to, kind of flex their muscles, so to speak. They've been getting their reps in the gym. They're looking more swole. They have their more military strength, and now you're starting to see their, they can essentially, they can have a voice now, right? They're forming more alliances. So you have, because we're speaking specifically here in regards to China, and China belongs to the BRICS, right? So you have Brazil, Russia. I think the I is India, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just verify that. And you have South Africa. One second. BRICS. Okay, so you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, excuse me, South Korea. I'm sorry, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, right? So, and this is very, very important here because, China is kind of like one of those key players in the BRICS. And we know, pursuant to Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, you have other nations, for example, Ethiopia and Iran, that are key players in being that hedge of protection around what we know as Russia today, right? They are also key players in going on in this stage of what's going on in regards to prophecy, right? In regards to that warlike mentality, because these other nations are not in that spirit of, farming anymore. They're in the spirit of war, right? And they're in the spirit of vengeance also, right? But it's the Lord that's putting that spirit upon these other nations to essentially, enact vengeance upon America. Because remember, when you go into, like, for example, like Egypt, because Egypt is a part of here, it says BRICS, a lot of these other nations have a sour taste in their mouth um, because of America, right? So, and when you go back into the history, there was war that broke out that same, I believe it was the day after, if I'm not mistaken, between the state of Israel and Egypt, right? Because the guy who was ruling at the time, he knew that they weren't the real people, because he has his famous quote where he said, I think his name was Gamal Nasser. He has his famous quote where he said, "How did you leave black and come back white, so to speak, so-called white," right? So you're starting to see, a lot of these other nations, they're kind of coming together now. There's a saying in the world, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So America, through Trump, has caused a lot of these other nations to he's left us essentially a sour taste in their mouth, right? As a matter of fact, let me go to Sirach. Um, is it? Hold on. Whoops. This is Sirach chapter 12, verse 8, and it says, "A friend cannot be known in prosperity, and an enemy cannot be hidden in adversity." So you start to see, the different um, adverse effects of Trump's tariffs, but not just Trump as a whole, but America in general. Now that all the different wickedness and different legislations that may have passed, whether it was sanctions, the chickens are basically coming home to roost at this point, and America has a long, lengthy judgment awaiting it. And the Lord's going to use these other nations as well as their own allies to enact that vengeance upon America, right? So let me go to here. Where was I? This is Jeremiah 50, verse 13. "And because of the wrath of the Lord shall not be inhabited, it shall be wholly desolate. Every one that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished and hiss at her plagues. Put yourself in array against Babylon round about. All ye that bend the bow," these different military weapons, these ICBM missiles that they have, that these other nations are stockpiling, right? It says, "Shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she hath sinned against the Lord," right? And the scriptures talk about how the eyes of the Lord are upon this sinful kingdom. And, America has essentially been an example of this is the way not to actually live. This is not a place that actually produces life, right? Especially, the things that have done to our people as a whole, right? So this is righteous. What's going on here is an example of righteous recompense, right? And this is what happens to a whore. When you go back into the law, the judgment is fire when you see that, right? It says, verse 15, it says, shoot against her round about. She hath given her hand. Her foundations are fallen, her walls are thrown down, for it is the vengeance of the Lord. Take vengeance on her as she hath done unto her, right? And when you go through it, let me just jump down to verse I'm going to jump down to verse 40, and it says, "As the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighbor cities thereof, saith the Lord, shall no man abide there, neither shall any son of man dwell therein," right? So it shows you there's a distinction between, what happened to ancient Babylon versus what's happening, the judgment that's going to befall upon this new Babylon. It's not the same, right? When you read about this different Babylon described here in Jeremiah 50, is a place where you would have, both of the kingdoms, they would reunite together. But the judgment is not the same, because remember, in ancient Babylon, it was taken over by the Persians and the Medes, right? But this Babylon here is describing that its judgment is going to befall that same judgment that happened to Sodom and Gomorrah as fire and brimstone. There's a difference here, right? Just to show you this Babylon that's being spoken of here, which is also synonymous as the same Babylon spoken of in Isaiah 13, it's not the same, right? This is Babylon is referring to a new revised Babylon known as America, the mother of all harlots, right? So, I guess I'll end off with this last precept here, because, sometimes a lot of our people, they see these things and they don't take it into consideration, because the scriptures say that seek ye the Lord while he may be found, right? So this is very important. This is Jeremiah 8 and 7, and it says, "The stork in the heaven," excuse me, knoweth her appointed times. The turtle and the crane and the swallow observe the time of their coming, but my people know not the judgment of the Lord, right? So these are different animals that know the different times of when the seasons are changing. They could sense it in the air. Okay, now it's, the temperature is changing, the winter is coming, now we have to actually try and store up food, you know, for the cold months, right? When you go into like bears, for example, bears are known as, they do something called hyperphagia, where they spend months, eating all the time, essentially to try and store up fat so they can stay warm during the winter months, because they understand, these animals understand there's going to be a time where food is going to be scarce, right? And if you think about it spiritually, in the same sentiment, we're pretty much doing the same thing, constantly eating, right? Because Yahweh Shai said that man should not live by bread alone, right? So constantly trying, getting closer to the Lord, so we can be remembered in those times of trouble, because a lot of our people, they're kind of more in that overly mirth spirit, and they don't understand exactly what's going on, right? So they don't actually try and seek the Lord when essentially it's too late, right? So, but it shows you the intelligence of these animals, and it shows you the stupidity of our people, right? Because the scriptures say that, how long ye simple ones will you love simplicity, and fools hate knowledge. Our people take the opportunity to essentially scoff at the Lord's messengers rather than actually trying to seek understanding. So, anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson was edifying. I'd just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.